and that's what I'm hoping to convey with the piece is to kind of convey that extinction is not just about like the loss of biodiversity. It's also a loss of these non-human forms of culture and forms of aesthetic beauty that just can't ever be recovered.
Welcome to the Wild Resonance Show, a new podcast and web series where we'll be exploring sounds of the natural world. We'll interview leading researchers, scholars, field recordists, musicians, sound artists who work either in or adjacent to the fields of bioacoustics and soundscape ecology. For this inaugural episode, we have Dr. Mason Youngblood, a postdoc fellow at the State University of New York in Stony Brook. Dr. Youngblood, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
And just a heads up to the listeners really quickly, I have a speech impediment that you'll hear throughout the interview.
Cool. Thank you for letting them know.
Yeah.
So, before we get too deep into it, as I've been preparing for this show, I've been talking to a lot of different people and they're like, what is bioacoustics? What is a soundscape? And I want to get into the areas of your specialization, but I wondered if at the outset, if you could just give us a little bit of a, sort of a generalist's definition of what bioacoustics and what a soundscape, what those things mean.
Yeah. So bioacoustics is the study of sound produced by biological organisms. Historically, it really started with things like the study of birdsong, and then expanded into cetaceans and other organisms. And then there's also soundscape ecology, which is the study of the sounds that you hear in an entire ecosystem. It's kind of like ecosystem level bioacoustics, and that's been gaining a lot of traction recently.
Cool. So what brought you to the field? At what point did you realize that this was a real area of interest, and how did you decide to pursue it?
Yeah. So I always played music as a kid, and I grew up in rural South Carolina. So I spent a lot of time outdoors and a lot of time thinking about sound. And I always had an interest in animal behavior. And so when I started college and I was majoring in biology, I knew I wanted to do something related to animal behavior, and ideally sound. And then halfway through college, I heard about people using zebra finches as a research model for stuttering, and I got really interested in the influence of cognition on birdsong and on vocal learning. And so when I applied for grad schools, I was specifically looking for labs studying the cognition of birdsong. I tried out a couple of things. I realized that that working with birds in the lab was not for me, and I was a lot more interested in kind of studying how cognition impacted birdsong culture out in the wild. And so I ended up focusing on that during my PhD. And then also during my PhD, I discovered the field of cultural evolution more broadly. So I started out studying culture in birdsong, but I've since expanded to also do a lot of work on culture in humans as well.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, and you've written, you've authored a large number of papers, and many of them, if I understand correctly, are about birdsong, bioacoustics, animal song, but you've also done some research into there was one about sampling in music, in dance music, or any form of music that uses sampling, right? And about sort of cultural transmission and conformity, or something about
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep,
so
yep.
I really want to get into that too, but keeping keeping temporally in order here. So you're in grad school now, and where did you go to grad school?
So I went to grad school at the City University of New York, and I was mostly based at Queens College out in Queens, and I focused on the house finch, which is an introduced urban species here. So all of my field work was in Queens and Brooklyn and Long Island. So I got to explore a lot of kind of out there places in the city with a shotgun microphone and a field recorder for a couple of years.
Cool.
It's a lot of fun.
And when you say introduced species, what does that mean exactly?
So it means that they are originally from California and Mexico, and they were introduced to Long Island. A small number of them were in the 1940s as part of the pet trade. And then they rapidly expanded all up and down the East Coast. So it's very interesting scientifically because when they first established and as they expanded, they started to form new dialects, and their songs culturally evolved on the East Coast in a different way than they were on the West Coast. It's kind of this alternate parallel history that occurred. There was a professor at Queens College at the time named Paul Mundinger, who saw this happening in real time and was really excited by it. And so in the 70s, he started to go out and record house finches all over the city and up into Connecticut, kind of as these dialects were forming. And so a lot of my work in grad school was heavily based off of and inspired by his field recordings.
Cool. Now, when you say that the dialects evolved, are we talking about completely different syllables, way syllables are expressed? Because these house finches, they do express themselves in syllables, right? Much like we have words. Is that a fair characterization, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, I think that the variation there is variation in the syllables that appear in the songs, and then there's also variation in the order in which they are sequenced in the song.
Okay.
So it's like people in different areas of the country like using different words and then using them in different orders as well, basically. And
so when you studied that, I know I read one of your papers about language-like efficiency, right? And in that paper, it sounds like there are these laws, these linguistic laws, Zipf's and Menzeras laws, right? And you were studying whether or not these house finches whether their vocalizations adhere to these laws in the same way as human languages do. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah.
So what are those two laws exactly, and what did you find?
Yeah. So I guess I should first zoom out and talk about why those laws are interesting in linguistics. Like in the 1940s, there was a famous linguist named George Zipf who came up with the idea of the principle of least effort, which in language is the idea that we tend to communicate as much information as we can with the least amount of effort. And effort comes in a lot of different forms. So some things can be easier or harder to learn, easier or harder to produce, easy or harder to hear and understand. And in language, it seems like languages evolve in that way. So to kind of to convey as much information as they can in the least amount of effort. So these linguistic laws are basically a way of quantifying that aspect of language. So there are three major ones that are often talked about. So there's Zipf's rank frequency law, Zipf's law of abbreviation, and Mensrath's law. And I'll just focus on the last two because I think they're the most relevant in animal communication, and they're also the easiest to talk about. So Zipf's law of abbreviation is the idea that words that are very common tend to evolve to be shorter in length. So and, the, his, her, these very common things are very short, and then words that are more rare, like bioacoustics, are quite long and harder to say. And so overall, if a language is like that, it means you can convey a lot more with less. And then Mensrath's law is the idea that as sentences get longer in length, they tend to be composed of shorter words. So kind of as I'm saying more in a single breath, I tend to choose shorter words. So I pack in as much as I can. And basically, I was interested in if those laws were present in house finches because animals that vocalize have a lot of reasons to convey as much as they can in a short amount of time too. So it's very energetically costly to sing. If you see videos of birds singing, their whole bodies are involved. It's it also attracts predators. And yeah, basically I found that house finch song exhibits those two laws, as well as a couple of other language-like properties, like hierarchical structure and how these syllables are organized, as an example.
You told us before when we were getting settled that you had seen Charlie XCX this weekend. So much in the same way as if I asked you how your summer was last summer and you said it was brat, I would know exactly what you meant. A lot of information is conveyed in that one concept. Birds do the same thing to protect themselves, to conserve energy. And so you see these similarities. They're fascinating in and of themselves. What else does it tell you, or what other questions are you seeking to answer by identifying these parallels?
So people have actively been researching birdsong for many decades now, but I think we're still just starting to understand how much is happening structurally in birdsong. And I think that a lot of the current research that is being done is kind of is moving away from just kind of understanding these more coarse measures of song, like average frequency and bandwidth, to a much more rich and nuanced understanding of the actual structure of song and how that's changing over the course of cultural evolution, and how the environment and the constraints imposed by biology are impacting that process. And I think right now in the study of birdsong and wild populations, that's kind of the area that people are moving towards, and it's definitely the area that I'm most interested in. So I see this linguistic law work as a step in that direction. And then another important piece is in that project, I was really focusing on the parallels between birdsong and language. And I think there's a lot of work to be done comparing birdsong and music, which are arguably a lot more analogous to one another. But I think music-like features are a lot harder to quantify, and that's a part of the problem. But
sure. Yeah. I have a beautiful old late 19th century or maybe early 20th century copy of, you'll help me remember the name, F. Schuler Matthews, Schooler Matthews. It's in it he transcribes birdsong.
Oh, cool.
But he goes even further, and he harmonizes birdsong, and he imagines that, oh, well, this is obviously like a Puccini aria in Birdsong, and he totally anthropomorphizes it, but it's very entertaining. It's very beautiful because you can tell how much he loves birdsong and loves these animals. And he says in the introduction, he's convinced that they sing not first for the love of the lady, but for the love of the song. His belief that they just love their own music so much, and that's why they're doing it. Of course, maybe that there's some truth to that, but I wonder if, as the scientific community comes to understand these species better, is there any truth or possibility that part of the bird's vocalizations is purely just for enjoyment, or something beyond territory, mating, warning calls, which are the more obvious reasons for vocalizations?
I think that is certainly a possibility. I mean, animals play quite often, and there's kind of increasing research and acknowledgement of that fact. And there are a lot of reasons why play happens in the wild, but it can help individuals to improve their skills in like a bounded way before having to implement them as an adult. And I think in songbirds, it's quite likely that they have evolved to enjoy singing for its own sake, because the more that you sing, especially when you're young, the better that you'll be able to sing as an adult when you're trying to attract mates. And I guess that is a functional, adaptive explanation for it. But I think the subjective experience of the individuals could very well just be sheer enjoyment of singing. I have a pet cockatiel who sings all the time throughout the day, and he certainly seems to enjoy it, and he does it a lot more when he's obviously feeling relaxed. So
that's great. Do you have some recordings of a house finch song that we could hear?
I do.
Great.
So I have a recording that was collected by Paul Mundinger.
Okay.
In the 1970s, and in Island Park, which I believe is in Long Island.
Okay.
And I have a version at its normal speed, and then I'll play a version at half speed so you can hear a bit more of the detail.
Cool.
I think you can tell it's already very structurally rich.
Yeah, definitely.
And then at halftime, I think there's a lot more of the nuance you can.
It's beautiful. And how many, having studied this so deeply, how many syllables would you say you hear when you listen to that? How many distinct pieces does that consist of?
I think this is right, but on average, males know between like 30 to 50 different types of syllables that they combine into, on average, 7 different song types.
Okay.
And in my studies of the East Coast house finches, we detected 596 different syllable types in the population as a whole. But there's a massive asterisk on those numbers, which is that we don't know exactly what the categories are that the birds perceive.
Sure.
So what we do is we take the songs, we extract all the syllables, and we make spectrograms of them. And then we cluster them based on their contours. So if you hear like a woo woo and then a woo, those have very different contours, and you can compute a distance between them, and then you can cluster those in space. And so there are a lot of choices that you make in that process, but our best estimate among the East Coast of birds is just under 600.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are these, to what extent are these syllables learned, innate? What's the, a fledgling house finch, at what point in its life does it know these? And if one is raised in captivity, does it develop some, all, without the sort of social, cultural conditioning, or how does that all work?
Yes, that's a great question. And in house finches, it's a bit of an open question. So there are hundreds, actually, I think thousands of songbirds that are thought to learn at least some aspect of their songs. But there's huge variation in the proportion of their song that is learned. And there are different ways that people study that. So one way is raising birds in isolation. Another way is raising birds with members of another species. And you get different answers in different species. In house finches, there's just been one study on this, which was actually conducted by Paul Mundinger in the 80s, I think. But it was not analyzed and published until my lab mate did that 8 or 9 years ago. And so in this study, house finches were raised by canaries and vice versa. And so you ended up with house finches who sang kind of a canary-like song that had been transformed into a house finchy pace and frequency range, and then the canaries learned house finch song that's been transformed into their pace and frequency range. But yeah, basically the idea is that a different species evolved to have different constraints on the types of sounds they can make. And then when you add vocal learning on top of that, then you kind of have this extra layer of cultural evolution happening inside of those evolved constraints.
That term, vocal learning, I mean, of course, we know that, virtually all, probably all animals to some extent produce sound, right? But not all seem to be capable of vocal learning per se. Is that right? So what differentiates vocal learning and the expressions of vocalization that are an expression of vocal learning versus other kinds of sounds that don't necessarily express that?
So a lot of animals communicate with sound that's completely innate, completely genetically inherited, including a lot of primates, actually. And in a lot of bird species, people will talk about calls versus songs. And often the distinction is that calls are largely innate, genetically inherited, and the songs are at least partly learned. And those calls are things that are very fundamental. So alarm calls because there's a predator, or begging calls that juveniles need to immediately know after they hatch to ask for food. And those kinds of sounds are a lot more widespread in animals. Species that learn their vocalizations are often species that are more social, that live in more complex social structures. But that question of why vocal learning evolves in some species and not others is still hotly debated, actually. It's still kind of a question that people are trying to figure out.
Yeah. You sent me the paper about song stabilization, which is more the vocal efficiency. It comes from more of a cultural angle, right? In bird vocalizations. What did you find? I think was it 3 generations that you studied of the mourning warblers, or tell us about that.
Yeah. So in both mourning warblers and in house finches, we have 3 time slices of their song over a very long period of time, going back decades. In the house finches, those were collected by Paul Mundinger and others, and then me most recently. And then in mourning warblers, it's been collected by Jay Pitticelli, who started recording them, I think in the 80s and 90s. And so if you have these time slices, this like longitudinal data on how songs change over time, then you can test hypotheses about the kinds of things that might be causing those changes in song. And so in both of those species, in both mourning warblers and in the house finches, we basically did simulations of different outcomes, like are the birds highly conformist? Do they care a lot about the content of the syllables, and do they tend to learn things that fit a particular criteria? Do they tend to only copy birds that have particular traits? And in both species, we found evidence that the cultural changes are being driven by the content of the songs and syllables themselves, that birds have strong preferences for learning sounds that have particular features. And in both cases, it seems like the birds prefer to learn things that are more complex. In the case of mourning warblers in particular, if all over Canada, these birds have very strong preferences for particular syllables that are more complex. And if they learn things with very high fidelity, then that can end up stabilizing their culture over a long period of time. So the songs actually change less than you might expect because their preferences are so strong.
Cool. And so I could talk about these birds forever, but you also did a very similar study and published a similar paper about cetaceans. So what did you find when you started looking, when you went from air to water?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my study in Wales was what's called a meta analysis. So I took all of these existing, previously published data sets that other scientists had collected and made publicly available. And I searched for evidence of those 2 linguistic laws I mentioned before, Zipf's law of abbreviation and Menzerath's law, in 16 different species.
Okay.
Some of which are toothed whales, like dolphins and killer whales. Others are baleen whales, like humpback whales. And in short, I found that Menzerath's law is present in a large majority of them. And then a subset of the species that have Menzerath's law also have Zipf's law of abbreviation. And I also did an analysis of the strength of these laws and 51 different human languages.
Okay.
And I found that that Menzerath's law in particular is often stronger in whales than it is in humans, which I found really interesting.
I read the paper, and I seem to remember you saying that in human language, Menzerath's law tends to apply more in the spoken word than in the written language. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Which that would make sense, that when we're writing, we try harder to be impressive and say something, eloquently and beautifully, and using the best word rather than maybe one could argue the best word should often be the most efficient word, but you understand what I'm saying. And so it would sort of make sense that in a less human contaminated, more primal community, something would adhere more to that law. Was there a major distinction between the baleen and the toothed whales as to whether one group or the other followed these laws or not?
Actually, there was not. So I was pretty surprised that there was not a major difference, especially because the types of vocalizations that toothed whales tend to produce and baleen whales tend to produce are very different. If you compare like a humpback whale with a sperm whale, a humpback whale is almost like slowed down birdsong. It's very pitched. It's very tonal, but sperm whales communicate entirely with clicks, and they also communicate for very different reasons. And so I was very struck by kind of how consistently these laws are found across these species that vocalize for very different reasons and in very different ways.
Do you have any recordings of any of the cetaceans?
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, baleen whales tend to the distinction between toothed whales and baleen whales is the way they feed, right? And baleen have like a filtration system, right, where they're basically big gulps and then filter out the water, take what they need and to nourish themselves, whereas toothed whales will attack specific animals for feeding.
Exactly. It's interesting because those two different life ways kind of seem independent of how they vocalize, but because the toothed whales are hunting in groups oftentimes, they have to coordinate their behavior very quickly, and a lot of them also echolocate. So kind of their life way has a very strong impact on how and why they vocalize.
And echolocation being sending out an acoustic signal and being able to react to objects or relate to objects around you based on the reflections of that sound. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah, like bats. Very cool. Okay, so let's listen.
Yeah. I'll start with a bit of a humpback whale song, and then we'll check out some sperm whale sounds. And then here are some examples of sperm whale codas, which are these sequences of clicks that are going to sound like very quiet and kind of meek in this recording, but if you're up close, there's some of the loudest sounds. I think over 200 dB.
Wow, which would be many times louder than a jet engine.
Yes, exactly.
And again, so the first whale, the humpback, that's a baleen whale, and those are the ones that you likened almost to slowed down birdsong, very lyrical, and then this is the sperm whale is a toothed whale, and these are the clicks, which will sound soft in the recording, but would actually immediately deafen us. If we were. Okay, great.
Yep. I love those because they're so immediately musical, and rhythmic.
Yeah. So so you found that in both cases, these vocalizations, this sound production, follows to a certain extent, or I think you said earlier that in some cases even more so than human language, follow these linguistic laws of efficiency.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's so cool.
And I should mention, I think that they are stronger in some cases because of the fact that if you are vocalizing underwater while essentially holding your breath, efficiency is a lot more important.
Yeah.
It's also easier to compress things that don't contain as much information in them. So in something like language, it's there's only so much that you can compress things and keep the same kind of meaning.
Interesting. In general, relative to body size, is there a difference in how long a baleen versus a toothed whale can be underwater?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a function of body size, definitely.
Any idea with the sperm whale? Because do you know if those clicks that we listened to, if they would have been used for echolocation?
Yep,
they would have been. And so you said probably in excess of 200 decibels. I would imagine that could then be going miles underwater.
Yes.
Do you know, sort of like a ranging question, like how, why do they need to go that far? What are they trying to communicate or looking for or finding? How are they utilizing those sounds across such vast distances?
Yeah, the sperm whale clicks are interesting because they are used in echolocation, but they're also used to communicate clan identity. So sperm whales all over the world are organized into these clans that produce distinctive patterns in their clicks, and they prefer not to hang out with one another. And there's an extremely interesting paper by Taylor Hirsch on sperm whales that shows that areas where they actually overlap more, the codas are more distinctive. So they are very much like a cultural marker. And so having these long distance signals that convey your identity to other groups of whales that you may not want to interact with is very usul.
And where were these whales, and when was this recording made?
I believe those sperm whales were recorded off of the coast of the island of Dominica.
Okay.
Sometime in the last 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what would be what could be, if you know, the next nearest clan that they would want to avoid interaction with?
I'm actually not sure exactly what the spatial scale of these clans are, like what the ranges are. But it is interesting to point out that all of this research on sperm whale clans and culture and communication is being done after an incredible amount of industrial whaling over a long period of time.
Sure.
So you can imagine before industrial whaling, when the population size globally was so much higher. I mean, you can imagine what the cultural complexity could have been like in the past, and how important these kinds of communication systems would have been.
Sure. Yeah, I think I was reading, or I watched a documentary about South Georgia Island recently, and they said that it was, when whaling began in the mid-late 19th century until it ceased, I think, on that island in the 60s, round about the 60s, it's something like 160, 170,000 whales were slaughtered. And the first recordings are probably like the Roger and Katie Payne released recordings from the 60s, right? So the earliest recordings we have of whales are already after the population had been completely decimated, right? So to your point, we can only imagine how the communication would have been different with much much larger communities. All right, so in addition to studying animals, you also have other research interests, and you wrote a paper called "Conformity Bias in the Cultural Transmission of Music Sampling." I'm imagining all sorts of connections that you might have found between these traditions of taking bits of music, applying them to other musical vocabularies, and what you uncover with all of these syllables and vocalizations of birds, canaries learning from house finches, vice versa. So tell us about that and what you found.
At first, I think seems quite disconnected, like the work on birdsong and the work on music sampling, but it's fundamentally about kind of how different categories of things kind of increase and decrease in popularity over time. And you have those exact same kinds of dynamics happening in birdsong and in music, of course. So the stuff on music sampling actually started quite early on in my PhD. And the first project I did was just testing the question of whether or not samples tend to spread through artist communities over history. So I reconstructed the structure of artist communities in the electronic and hip hop music based on collaboration patterns, like who's co-released music with who. And then if you then look at the first occurrence of a sample like the amen break over time, it spreads through that network almost like a pathogen would, in a way that's very strongly consistent with cultural transmission. And then in a follow-up paper, I was interested in whether or not that pattern of spread is conformist or anti-conformist. So in addition to that spread, are people more or less likely to use samples that are more or less common in their communities? And I found that there's a strong preference for using samples that are already very common in your community. And I think that this is because a lot of samples like the amen break are almost used as identity markers.
Absolutely.
So in jungle and drum and bass, for example, the inclusion of the amen break is almost a prerequisite for being a part of that genre.
Sure.
And so over history, you have a handful of music samples that have always been very dominant and have kind of always defined particular genres.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost like instruments themselves, right?
Yeah,
like a certain genre you would not expect to hear without an 808. A particular kind of unique drum machine that identifies, that codes with that style of music. That makes a lot of sense. How did you go about assembling your data sets for these?
Yeah, so I worked with data from whosampled.com, an awesome crowdsourced database where fans of hip hop and electronic music tag samples that they've heard in people's music. And then the collaboration data all came from Discogs, which if you're interested in studying music from before the streaming era is far, far better, because a lot of music from the 80s and 90s just isn't on Spotify.
That's so cool. So, and part of this interest, comes from the fact that you said you are a musician. You've been interested in music from, not just as a listener, but producing music from a young age. So tell us about Callosum.
Yeah. So, Callosum is a project that I started in 2013.
Okay.
When I first started producing electronic music. And it's like an experimental club music, a deconstructed club music project. And when I first moved to New York in 2015, a major driver of that move was, it was not just doing grad school, it was to be a part of the music scene here. So I've been DJing and producing music under that name for, I guess, coming up on 12 years now.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And where's the best place to find it?
Spotify, Apple Music, Bandcamp. And then I have a bunch of mixes on SoundCloud as well. You can check out there. And
do you find that your, that the work you do, studying sound in such other sort of far-reaching categories informs what you're doing with this project at all?
Yes. So in fact, my studies of music sampling were directly inspired by just being embedded in music production communities and just kind of seeing these practices of sample sharing and copying happening in real time. So yeah, there's been a lot of exchange, I think, including incorporating field recordings in my music production, which I've been doing for a long time.
And you have sort of beyond club or dance music, you also have this sound art project that you're currently working on, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of recreating soundscapes or a soundscape.
Yes. For the past 2 years, I've been developing a sound art practice that was kind of kicked off by the idea of trying to reconstruct the sounds of extinct bird species. There's this extremely famous recording of a species called the Kauaʻi ʻōʻō. And it's a recording of the last male on the island of Kauaʻi in Hawaii in the early 1980s, before the species went extinct. And around the same time I heard that recording for the first time, I stumbled across a mathematical model of the syrinx, the avian vocal organ. And so I had the idea of trying to fit that mathematical model to that last recording of the Kauaʻi ʻōʻō, and then extrapolate from the fit version of that model to make songs that the species could have, in theory, been able to produce. And so I've been working on that for a couple of years now, and I'm at the point where I have all these imagined songs of past Kauaʻi ʻōʻōs, and I've made an installation where you can experience the dawn chorus, or an imagined a dawn chorus of this extinct bird, for the colonization of the island of Kauaʻi.
Wow. And so this, the Kauaʻi, we have this, and I've listened to it, and it is quite beautiful. We'll see if we can link to a public recording of it in the video description. Is that? But what I didn't go much deeper. It's the last recording. Is it the only recording we have of this bird? Do we have many more preceding it?
There are 3 or 4.
Okay, so it's not a big sample
that are semi-publicly available. I had to request access from Cornell.
Gotcha. And so these and then from there, you imagine the possibility of these other songs.
Yeah,
based on this mathematical model of what the bird was physically capable of.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and basically the idea is that when song is culturally evolved and a population declines, the songs become less complex and less diverse over time. In this same way that happens with human language, like there's a linguistic extinction crisis in humans as well. Whereas small-scale societies and cultures slowly decrease, the languages become less complex, and it's this kind of intangible cultural loss that is happening in other species that I think is really heartbreaking, and that's what I'm hoping to convey with the piece is to kind of convey that extinction is not just about like the loss of biodiversity. It's also a loss of these non-human forms of culture and forms of aesthetic beauty that just can't ever be recovered.
So that's incredible. So when, if you know, when and where will people be able to experience this piece?
Yeah, so it is going to debut in immersive audio at the Ray Forrester's Laboratory in Williamsburg.
Okay.
On July 12th.
Okay.
And I'm doing a residency there, so it may appear again.
Okay.
And then it will also be in a group show at Ortega y Gasset Projects early 2026. Okay. But hopefully it'll pop up elsewhere.
Yeah, is that also in New York?
Dates. Yeah, that's in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn.
Yep.
Very cool. Yep. Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's been it's been revelatory, and we could do this for many more hours. But I won't do that to you. We'll save it. We'll save it for future conversations. But something I wanted to do, a sort of a segment on this show that was inspired by the National Geographic sort of children's magazine that I read when I was younger, had a "What in the World," and it was these images, and you didn't know what they were, and you had to guess, and there was a key in that. So I thought it would be fun before we conclude to do a sort of "What in the World" of sound. And so I asked you to bring 3, maybe favorite, recordings that I likely won't know what they are, and many of our viewers, listeners may not know what they are either, and you can just tell us a little bit about them. So So hit me with a sample. Let me see what I hear, and then you can tell me what's really going on.
All right, cool. I have a few sounds that are from a deep listening workshop I do.
Okay.
Periodically called Deep Listening for Non-Human Perspective Taking. And these are my 3 favorites from that workshop.
Awesome.
So let's start off with this one.
It has amazing regularity. The rhythmic consistency of it is impressive. I'm going to guess, go out on a limb and ask if it's possibly not an animal.
It is an animal.
It is an animal.
Yep.
Okay. So my first guess is wrong. So it's I'm going to guess that. Then my next guess is I'm going to guess that it's an aquatic animal.
Yes.
All right. Is it a dolphin?
It's not. It's
all right. I'm out of guesses.
Tungara frog.
Oh wow!
A South American frog. They float on the surface of ponds and make these incredible sounds. And an interesting tidbit about them is they are predated on by bats.
Okay.
And the bats, they localize them by echolocating on the surface of the pond and tracking the ripples instead of the sound itself, because it's kind of below their hearing range.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really,
man,
it's really cool.
I feel a little bit ashamed because frogs are my favorite animal to the extent that I probably if as this show evolves, people will learn that, but I've been obsessed with frogs since I was very young. Wow. So the bats, say that again, they're echolocating off the surface and the water is rippling because of the frog vocalizations, which the bats, which does not fall within the frequency range of the bat's hearing. So so their echolocations are basically tracking. It's like proximity between these waves, so to speak, on the water. That's unbelievable. We'll have to post pictures too. Now I want to see what this looks like.
Yeah.
All right, number 2. Pictures.
Okay. Here's number 2.
It sounds like me it sounds like I'm camping. It's been raining all night. I'm not wearing my glasses and I'm looking for a place to use the bathroom. That's what that sounds like to me. But I don't I don't even have a guess. Tell us about that.
So that's a wolf spider doing
oh my god, it's a spider.
A courtship display where it drums to impress a female. And that particular recording is from a study that showed that the females prefer mating with males who produce more complex beats.
Okay.
And that particular male is the hottest male in that study.
Oh, I love that. And so, okay, so you said so it's drumming or it's beating on something. Is that an external object, or is that all on like in its own body? Is it beating its abdomen, or is it, what is it?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think it is drumming on the substrate it's on, like using its pedipalps and its legs. But there are other species of jumping spiders, a different group, that also produce sound by vibrating their body.
If not amplified through this through these stereo speakers, how loud was that sound? Would we be able to hear it?
Quiet?
Okay, so we would not be able to hear it without amplification.
No.
Okay, and so we're talking about a couple hundred times maybe that was amplified. Interesting. Third and final one.
I've got one more. And this one may be more recognizable.
I'm going to say those are the dolphins.
Close. Those are our weddell seals.
Seals
in Antarctica. Yeah. Yep. So that is actually from a Werner Herzog documentary. There's a famous scene. It's Edge of the World, I think.
Journey to the Edge of the Earth or something. That documentary is hard to find.
Yeah,
I was trying to watch it the other day and I could not find it anywhere. And it is so, he's so funny in that movie.
Yeah.
It came out around the same time of March of the Penguins, which was a very, I don't know who made March of the Penguins, but I feel like it was a very sort of Disneyfied take on it. And Werner Herzog at the beginning of this movie says, "This will not be a movie about cute little marching penguins." And then he starts talking about, he makes some observation, some very Herzogian observation about evolution. And he shows there's like a camel with a chimp riding it or something, some totally absurd illustration that was meant to illustrate his oddball point. But anyway, I interrupted you. These seals are from that documentary.
That's right. Yeah. There's an amazing scene where there's all of these scientists with their ears on the ice. And this audio is playing in the background. And this is basically what it sounds like if you drop a hydrophone in the water.
So these are vocalizations occurring underwater.
Yeah. And there are probably a lot of seals in that one recording.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a relatively recently discovered sound.
Mm-hmm.
Don't really know what it's for.
It's beautiful. It sounds, it almost sounds synthetic. It sounds it sounds like the coolest synthesizer you've ever heard or something.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a modular experiment.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. It's been a tremendous amount of fun, and I can't wait to read more of the papers, see the or experience your sound installation, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.